A few of the surviving factions of original Jarvencia were later gathered together via Avercia. Everyone believed he was killed in the previous Earth invasion, including Jason, but instead the twisted former ruler of the Jarvencia slowly rebuilt his army, whilst preparing for the ultimate destruction of the Alpha Omniverse. Dakara also continued to rebuild his forces, either by creating new Jarvencia or recruiting the few who willingly joined him. And by the year 2007, in the Stars Earth timeline, he was strong enough to strike at the Torrentia universe. This strange reality was made up of what we would call pure angelic energy that could restore any creature back to life. Its own life forms, meanwhile, were immortal. The universe finally was also bigger on the inside than the outside and went on forever on the inside to accommodate the new life forms. Whilst it was a paradise, many of its immortal creatures still left it to go exploring the rest of creation. Outside of their own reality, whilst they were still powerful, these angelic creatures could be killed, though, generally speaking, they were worshipped as divine beings. One such renegade named Tial would be the Jarvencia's way of invading this universe. He had originally been the king of his people and, ironically, would be responsible for making sure that only a select number of his race were allowed to leave the dimension at any time out of fear of misusing their power. This policy was enacted after their renegade Vaya became one of the most evil beings in all creation, wreaking havoc on the multiverse, with Jason facing him many times. Eventually, however, even Tial grew tired of his people and left them. Subsequent rulers would still try to enact his policy, though none were ever able to do so effectively. Tial, meanwhile, fell victim to Dakara, as utilising some of the energy he had drawn from Ystara's core, mixed in with other dark magics he'd gathered, he was able to place the angelic being under his control. Ystara's universe was only one of other realities to match the Torrentia universe in power, with both realities having a healthy respect for one another out of mutual fear. Using Tial to help them gain entry to Torrentia and hide, the Jarvencia experimented with the energy from their universe in a way that no other life forms had ever been able to do. They were the first intruders the universe had ever had. Dakara used his own supply of dark magic to corrupt the healing energy of this universe itself, turning its effects and all-consuming power into a dark force that could destroy a life form completely, with no hope of resurrection. Eventually, Dakara's experiments drew the attention of the other angelic beings, but by the time they took action, Dakara was able to create an impenetrable wall around his base of poison that killed even the angels, allowing him to carry on with his experiments to create the ultimate weapon. One of the angels, ironically a renegade named Avercia, summoned Jason Vesper back to the Stars version of Earth to help. By this stage, Jason was travelling with the immortal warrior Alicia Washington, who he was deeply in love with. Avercia knew about Jason's experiments with the Rips from years prior and believed that he could briefly open a portal with them inside Dakara's palace. The vampire at first refused, believing it was too big a risk, but as Dakara started to use his weapon on other planets and other realities, wiping them from existence, it soon became clear he had no choice. Sadly, Dakara became aware of the angel's plans after capturing and torturing one of them during a botched attack on his base, and sent Jarvencia soldiers to sabotage Jason's experiments. Their actions very nearly created a rip that swallowed the Earth, though it also had bad after-effects for Dakara, as Jason's botched experiment instead pulled his palace into the Earth, with the castle arriving in the centre of London. There was mass panic in the streets as the military tried to control the situation, and the Jarvencia began slaughtering people. In the end, Jason and Alicia were able to destroy Dakara's weapon, but at a huge price. Alicia was consumed by the dark energy Dakara had created, which destroyed her. She willingly sacrificed herself, with her last words to Jason being that she loved him, and that at least this time her death wasn't meaningless. Alicia's sacrifice also destroyed Dakara's lab, which was subsequently sent back into the Torrentia, with the angels proceeding to slaughter the Jarvencia, except for Dakara, who typically left his men to die. Whilst the Rips were closed once again by Jason, it still led to widespread panic on Earth that another crisis could happen, and Jason subsequently went into hiding for years after he was so broken by Alicia's loss. Years later, after returning to his travels, Jason was inspired by his new companion, Misha, herself a victim of the 2007 invasion, to hunt Dakara down. Even Dakara was surprised at the extent at which Jason pursued him with their next encounter, shaking the Jarvencia to the very core as Jason destroys his new base and killed every single one of his new soldiers. Whilst Dakara was forced to flee once again, he was still able to drive a wedge between Jason and Misha by revealing that he had hit his role to bringing the Jarvencia to this reality during the 2007 invasion where her family were killed. The two were eventually able to overcome the rift, with Misha understanding that if Jason hadn't done anything, then her family would have died anyway, though she found it difficult to trust him after he lied to her for a long time. Despite this victory, Dakara remained in hiding for a few years from Jason until he tried to think of his next move. Ironically, when he did meet Jason again for the last time, it would be as unlikely allies against Avercia, who had finally united and rebuilt his forces. Avercia had travelled to multiple universes, not only to rebuild his army, but plant weapons that would be capable of destroying each universe. During this time, he had destroyed the last of Jarvenca's Jarvencia. They remained defiant to the end, with their last words being as Avencia's forces exterminated them. "We are the Jarvencia." Once his weapons were in place, Avercia activated them through a single device. Jason was in one universe that was affected when it went off, and only barely escaped with Misha. As multiple realities began to fade, Jason returned to the Stars universe, which had also begun to crumble, leading to widespread anarchy as the great powers of the universe, such as the Zetas, struggled to contain the chaos, with many falling. The fabric of the universe turned green as it began to die, the stars exploded, galaxies collided, and there was a mass exodus of species as many fled to any world they could. Avencia's weapons tapped into the one element that exists in all realities, Dyran energy, and used it to turn against and unravel each reality, with Avercia having spent centuries analysing this element in his solitude, even before he began building his new army. Some realities unravelled more quickly than others, and as part of the bedrock of creation, the Stars universe was a lot more resilient than most, though in some ways this meant its inhabitants suffered more. Finally, another reason it held was the power of the Zetas and their god, using all their energy to hold it together as long as they could, though this rendered them unable to do much else. After making their way through multiple dead or dying universes, Jason and Misha finally arrived back on Earth, where he was reunited with many of his allies and friends from all his travels, including Lord McAllister and the time-travelling circus family, which included his former lover, Carleen, as well as many former companions such as his daughter Mona, with Dakara soon arriving on the Earth after. When he first saw Dakara, Jason instantly tried to kill him, but the others held him back, long enough for Dakara to tell Jason the truth. The last of the Jarvenca's Jarvencia, before their execution, had sent a distress call, which Dakara had been able to trace, allowing him to find the location of Avencia's base. It was located in the flaming wall between universes. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike, but Avencia's forces constantly pursuing him made that almost impossible. With his allies, including Dakara's help, Jason was forced to open the rip a second time to create a portal to Avercia's new castle in the flames, alongside his new army of Jarvencia. Avercia wasn't simply wanting to destroy these universes. By residing in the flames between realities, and from which all universes in the Alpha Omniverse emerged, Avercia hoped to draw the raw Dyran energy after the rest of the multiverse had collapsed, and it was all that remained into himself. The combination of this power from all realities would make Avercia a god. Indeed, he would possess greater power than the actual god of the Alpha Omniverse ever did. Armed with this power, Avercia hoped to conquer other realities in the void, the nothingness from which every multiverse resides and comes from. Ironically, Jason being banished by Avercia to the edge of the Alpha Omniverse had shown the monster that there was life beyond the Omniverse. Avercia had always been dismissive of such ideas and believed that the Alpha Omniverse was all there was, but now he saw there were universes stretching out throughout all eternity. He realised that his quest to gain ultimate power was pointless. All he wanted now was just to make as many universes out of the void suffer as much as he could. Carleen had a vision, as did the circus family themselves, that Avercia, if not stopped, would succeed in his plan and bring chaos to an incalculable number of multiverses within the void. Truly, no creature had ever posed the threat he did. The resulting battle was long and hard, and, ironically, Jason only succeeded thanks to the last survivor of Jarvenca's army. This single soldier had escaped his kind slaughter by posing as a double agent, and had even been forced to see the last of his brothers and sisters be executed. This, however, simply drove his hatred of Avercia on to the point where not only aided Jason and Dakara with vital information, but later blew himself up and took out a large section of the castle's defences in the process, allowing Jason and the others to escape back to the Star's Earth with a device that powered Avencia's weapons. In death, Jarvencia ended up playing a key role in defeating the monsters he despised more than anything. Back on Earth, Jason, with the help of his allies, used the power from the rip to create a force field around the Earth to protect it from Jarvencia's reprisal, whilst Jason tried to find a way to dismantle the device which was still working. The individual weapons could not be dismantled as they were pure energy, and no life form could get near them. They had to be shut down from this weapon. The Jarvencia forces, meanwhile, constantly attack the force field around the Earth with other great powers of the universe, trying to help the Earth, but none was a match for the Jarvencia. It took Jason several weeks, which was the hardest time in human history, as the world began to crack under the strain of housing the weapon. Worse, Dakara, in his final act of cruelty, later stole the machine, hoping to use it to become a god like Avercia. He destroyed the force field in the process, hoping to flee whilst the Jarvencia and the forces of Earth fought it out with one another. Jason, however, pursued him in the balloon with Misha by his side, whilst the rest of his allies did their best to protect the Earth from the onslaught. Avercia, meanwhile, in turn, followed Jason with his elite Jarvencia, with the vampire being none the wiser. Jason fought with Dakara in a dying universe, thanks to Avencia's weapon, where he was able to finally kill his nemesis by trapping him in an area of the universe that had collapsed. As Jason attempted to flee, however, the balloon was surrounded by Aversia's soldiers. With no other choice, Jason flew the balloon with the weapon straight into Avencia's mother ship. He had figured out a way to destroy the weapon during his studies on Earth, but sadly doing so would cause an explosion big enough to consume the Earth. Naturally, he did not wish to explore this method when he was on the Earth, and he couldn't leave. In order to make it work, he would have to sacrifice the balloon. Jason did not fear death for himself, but he did not want to sacrifice Misha. Still, she had insisted on coming along, and she also had no hesitation in sacrificing herself for the greater good. Before they made the final fight together, Misha finally told Jason that she loved him. The balloon crashed into Avencia's vessel, destroying itself, the weapon, and the vessel in an explosion which soon engulfed the rest of the fleet. Jason and Misha managed to escape the balloon before its destruction and take control of a Jarvencia ship, which he attempted to use to escape from the explosion. Avercia, however, managed to escape his vessel and latched onto Jason's. Avercia no longer cared about his own survival and simply sought to make the vampire pay. But the circus family soon arrived on the vessel in their timeship in the nick of time, distracting Avercia long enough for Jason to strike his mortal enemy out of the ship and into the inferno of his own making, with Jason and Misha then escaping with the family. Avercia believed he was truly immortal, and maybe he was, but it was ultimately a poison of his own making that finally brought his miserable existence to an end. Sadly, not all of the Jarvencia perished with Avercia. Many of their forces on Earth remained, and for the next few months, humanity continued to suffer under their forces, whilst Jason and his allies and other powers of the universe fought back against them, and were eventually successful in destroying the monster's fleet and saving Earth. The entire conflict lasted only 3 months from the weapon being set off to the destruction of the fleet, but it was still the most devastating conflict in the history of the Alpha Omniverse. Over 200 million on Earth died alone. Whole cities were destroyed, powers' structures dismantled, whilst across the universe many other worlds endured worse casualties. Though the star's universe was eventually able to heal itself, thousands of universes were destroyed and thousands of others were devastated. Things would never be the same again. Jason never returned to his travels. He could have probably rebuilt the balloon, but after the carnage inflicted on the Earth, he decided to stay on the planet with Misha and help out. He later lost his vampirism through a battle with another enemy that allowed him and Misha to finally settle down and start a family, with Jason dying decades later of natural causes on the star's Earth. The Jarvencia themselves, meanwhile, were believed to have finally been driven to extinction during the invasion, but tragically, one small ship managed to escape the slaughter. It would hide on the other side of the star's universe for centuries. It remained in a state of suspended animation, hidden by interdimensional magics for over 2,000 years, until they were awoken by a demon and began rebuilding their forces. Though there was another war, the Jarvencia were still mere shadows of their former selves and crushed by a new alliance of races, finally bringing an end to their evil. Whilst he may not have lived to see the final end of their race, there is no doubt that Jason Vesper did more to hold these horrifying creatures back than anyone. He endured incredible losses, saw the full extent of their evil and the chaos they inflicted, yet never gave in and ultimately destroyed their vile empire. Thankfully, there were no counterparts to the Jarvencia in other realities. Whilst they weren't the only species to exist in just one universe, as Jason himself said, the horrors that created those monsters could thankfully never be replicated in all of infinity. That it happened once was almost too much for all of creation. Whilst the Jarvencia were undoubtedly his arch enemies, Jason encountered many other horrifying creatures on his travels, more than once, the worst of which we will explore in the next article.